right into the race for Congress in New Hampshire's 1st District today. We have two guests who are already legislators under the Golden Dome in Concord serving in the House, but now they want to make the move to Capitol Hill in Washington. We're going to get things started with Brian Cole, a Republican from Manchester. Representative, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me on.
So for starters, you know, this is the first time a lot of people in the state are seeing you, so tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Congress.
Okay. Originally from Raymond. I grew up in Raymond. I was born in Concord, went to Raymond High School, and then I went to Southern New Hampshire University. I graduated there with my degree in economics and finance and accounting. And then I opened a business here in Manchester. So I had a business here in town for 25 years where I employed local people and I supported the local economy. And I was fortunate enough last year to be able to retire from that business. And now I get do my life in public service, helping the people of the Granite State.
Yeah, your second term in Concord, and now you want to go to Washington. Tell us why.
I want to go to Washington to help the people of New Hampshire. I've seen what I can do up at the legislature to the big things that I was on co-sponsors of both bail reform bills. So the first thing we did in 23, we saw the opioid deaths drop 500 people in Manchester that year alone. So that was important legislature. And on the second bail reform, which is going to be enacted probably in a couple of weeks.
Right, early September.
Yeah, Manchester's going to see a big turnaround. The revolving door of criminals is going to stop.
Yeah, and in terms of priorities, you know, this is an interesting topic because it sort of predated what we see now President Trump doing in Washington, D.C. and these other cities. Manchester, the course correction came from the legislature in essence, and also Mayor Rouet, and then Manchester voted for Kelly Ayotte as well. I'm curious for your perspective, what do you think about the president exercising that kind of power? Obviously, he has it over D.C., but when he points to New York City and Chicago and says you're on notice, do you think that's appropriate?
I do, and I think he's trying to clean up the city just like we're trying to clean up Manchester, and I think you've seen a huge impact. Anybody that lives in the city has seen the change over the last couple of years. I think that's what he's trying to do in D.C.
Do you think, though, that those communities should have to learn the lesson themselves and then elect different leaders?
One would hope. They like the positive change. They want people to keep that change, so put those leaders into position of power.
So you're essentially saying, hopefully this is temporary.
Yep.
You wouldn't want to see a president with that kind of control for a long period of time?
No, hopefully they can clean it up and then maintain it. Maybe they can change some laws like we've done here, down in that district, in order to keep the city maintained and proper. You know,
what are some other, go ahead.
Yeah.
What are some other priorities you want to bring with you to D.C.?
Well, I have three major priorities for the state of New Hampshire. The first one is energy prices. So we all know that New Hampshire has the highest energy prices probably in the country. And I'd like to bring nuclear back. I'd like to see a micro nuclear power plant be built next to Seabrook. So Seabrook already has all the fuel there. They can use the fuel from that plant. The plant would be about 1/3 the size that Seabrook is now and would produce more power. And I also like to see a micronuclear plant probably up in Berlin. And that would take care of New Hampshire's energy needs. And any extra energy we'd be able to sell to the surrounding states.
What would be the timeline on that? Obviously, some of that technology is still in development and it's on the horizon, but people are hurting right now.
Yes, in Michigan, actually, they're doing it right now in Michigan. So they have basically the same setup, and they're proceeding with it.
How do you pave the way in Congress?
We're going to have to work with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I'll work with President Trump's team. You know, we'll try to reduce those barriers to getting this project done, but I think it's something that has to happen in New Hampshire. We need to lower energy costs for families in New Hampshire.
You would go to Washington with quite a bit of experience in the import-export business. That was part of what you were involved in, so you do have a unique perspective on tariffs and international trade. Yep. Do you think Congress should take more control over tariffs back from the executive?
No, I think he's trying to be balanced back into the import-export industry in the United States. During his first term, I had containers on the water, and he did 25% tariffs, so I know what it feels like, and there's a little bit of pain there, but we have to balance it out with the rest of the world. You know, New Hampshire, or I should say, the United States was falling behind in that category, so I think it's fair.
Let's say, though, that your business relies on Nation X for a huge portion of whatever it is you produce. Their leader's relationship with President Trump or a president deteriorates, and you have an executive with so much power that if things go south, they can just kind of zap that one country with a tariff, and suddenly you have a 50% tax increase on what you do in business. Is that really how it should work?
It's tough when it first happens, but as long as it stays the norm, then the industries eventually shift over and they absorb those costs, and unfortunately they get passed on to the consumer. That's the way it works, but yeah, you have to live with it. I mean, that's just business. There's always challenges as a business, and you just have to meet the upcoming challenges. I think the tariffs like I said, it's leveling the playing field with the rest of the world.
So you think in this regard as well, this is something that should not be a permanent measure? I mean,
it can be flexible.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, it can be flexible.
As long as a better deal is achieved.
Right.
It just seems odd. We're in this kind of parallel universe right now where Republicans are defending taxes. That just seems strange.
It does. But it's when you're just doing like a tariff on an import tax, it applies to everybody in the United States. It's not singling out any one person. So it's across the whole spectrum. So as far as fairness goes, it's probably the fairest way to do it.
You serve as the vice chair of the Housing Committee in the House. This has become kind of a controversial issue in the Republican Party, and you're not necessarily leaving that universe. The debate will continue in Concord. I'm just curious what you would like to do on the housing issue in Congress.
Well, I can say from the state level, everything that we did in the committee, most of the legislation that came out of there was bipartisan, and most of it went on the consent calendar. Unfortunately, some of it came off, but we're very proud of the legislation we did. And I was talking to Chris Slayer, who's a builder here in New Hampshire, and one of his major barriers was the intercooperation between the government agencies and all the red tape that they have to go through. So that's a lot of things that we try to do in the Housing Committee. We tried to break down those barriers to make it easier for people to actually build the houses, decrease the timelines, because time is money in that industry. So we're seeing that happen. Like we have over 500 units coming online here in Manchester in the next couple of years, so it's exciting. I think I would like to do something that maybe incentivizes the towns a little bit. If I could do that at the federal level to bring federal money in, that's exactly the way I would do it.
And essentially try to lower the cost maybe of doing business altogether.
Yep, and make it actually affordable. Yep.
Do you think that, is it Washington, or, I mean, obviously there's a unique matrix of government involvement here, and the local level is hugely important. Can Washington make enough of an impact on this issue, though?
I think you can. I think you can make some federal laws. I think it takes basically what it comes down to is money and building the infrastructure and helping out New Hampshire.
And speaking of help, the One Big Beautiful Bill, you know, there's a lot in there. A big focus, at least to the people who have been in the delegation, all Democrat in New Hampshire, a lot of focus on the cuts to Medicaid and how that might impact rural hospitals. You know, and you don't have the entire North Country, but you got a piece of the Mount Washington Valley there and the Lakes region, and so there are rural hospitals in that district. There's a rural health fund that came along with the One Big Beautiful Bill. Because of the cuts to Medicaid, the fear was that some of these hospitals might go out of business. $50 billion, it's a lot on paper, but potentially some have said not enough to cover some of the shortfalls when you have to apply it all the way across the country. So this is another sort of is this the way it should work question. Why is it better to backstop these hospitals with that fund like that rather than insure the poorest people on the front end through Medicaid?
Well, when you're talking about $50 billion, I can tell you that $1.1 trillion of the last 10 years has been misallocated. So that's, I don't want to necessarily call it cuts. I think it's kind of cleaning up the balance sheet. I think people, if you're able-bodied, you should be working or looking for a job. And I don't think that should go to people that aren't citizens of this country. That should be going to the American taxpayers. So I don't want to call it cuts. I think it's just straightening it out.
Okay, but nonetheless, on rural health, you know, what would you want to see done if we do start to see those rural hospitals put in financial danger?
I would do anything I could to get some federal dollars to help stabilize them. I wouldn't want to put our hospitals in jeopardy.
The abortion issue was not the one that Democrats thought it would be back in 2024, but it's still notable. What's your position on abortion? How would you be voting down there in Washington?
Well, I'm pro-life, but I agree with the Supreme Court, and I believe that the issue should be left to the states. Certain states in different parts of the country feel differently. Here in New Hampshire, I'm happy with the legislation the way we have it now.
And so essentially, if anything came forward, you would say this is a state issue and I'm a no?
I would be a no in Congress, yeah. It's a state's issue. It's not a federal issue as far as I'm concerned.
How about Social Security? Would you like to see any changes made to that program?
I want to make sure it survives. A lot of people depend on that for their livelihood as they get older, so I would do whatever I can to make sure that that doesn't go away.
Would that include any kind of aspect of privatization or being able to use you know, a private account to invest the money differently than, say, the government might?
I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because a lot of people could be a lot smarter with their money, but then again, you have people that just need that stability check and they don't know how to handle their money. So the way it's working right now is good, but I wouldn't mind seeing an option to do that. I think that should certainly be available to the American.
As we wrap up here, redistricting has become an issue anew, and it was usually just every 10 years, but now the president is saying he's interested in seeing this done in certain states. What do you think about this? Obviously, you're in a unique position because you're both running and you serve in the House. Should New Hampshire redraw the maps?
I think we should do a little bit of redrawing. I know Kelly's a little apprehensive about doing that at this point in time, but hopefully she comes back to the table and she wants to take a look at it. I've worked with State Representative Ross Berry on this very issue, and he feels pretty confident that we should do a little bit of redistricting here in New Hampshire.
All right, Representative, thanks for joining us on Close Up, and we'll see you out there on the campaign trail.
Thanks for the time.